there is a book that was quoted in the New Testament, treated as scripture by some of the earliest Christian writers, read and copied for centuries, and then it vanished from Europe so completely that for well over 1,000 years, scholars weren't sure it had ever really existed. They knew its name. They knew it had been quoted, but nobody in the West had seen a copy since roughly the 8th century. And then, in 1773, a very tall, very stubborn Scotsman came home from Ethiopia with 3 of them in his luggage, and nobody believed him about that either. That book is the Book of Enoch, and tonight I'd like to tell you the whole of its story. What's actually written in it, where it came from, who wrote it and why, how it was lost, how it survived for 1,500 years in the highlands of Ethiopia while Europe forgot it existed, and how fragments of it turned up in a cave above the Dead Sea in the 1950s, in the original Aramaic, older than anyone had dared hope. It's a strange book. It's a book about angels who came down from heaven because they wanted the daughters of men, and who taught humanity metalworking and cosmetics and astrology and the writing of letters, and whose enormous children ate everything on the earth and then turned on the people who had fed them. It's a book about a man who walked with God and was taken, and who traveled to the ends of the earth and saw where the dead are kept and where the winds are stored, and what the throne of God looks like from close enough to be terrified. It's a book with the oldest surviving detailed description of hell and one of the oldest descriptions of a coming messianic figure called the Son of Man, and an entire technical treatise on the movements of the sun and moon that started a calendar argument that helped split Judaism apart 2,000 years ago. We'll take all of it slowly. There's no rush at all, and I'm not going to hurry any part of it. And if you drift off somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere among the angels on the mountain, or the storehouses of the winds, or a Scottish laird arguing with the court of a king in Gondar, that's perfectly fine. That's rather the idea. The book has waited 2,000 years. It'll keep. Let's start where the whole thing starts, which is with a very short passage in Genesis that leaves an enormous amount unsaid. In the 5th chapter of Genesis, there's a genealogy, one of those long lists of names that most readers skim past. It runs from Adam down through his descendants, and the formula for each one is the same. So-and-so lived this many years, and fathered so-and-so, and lived this many more years, and had other sons and daughters. And then, the phrase that closes every entry, and he died, and he died, and he died, over and over down the whole list, like a slow drumbeat. Adam died, Seth died, Enosh died, Kenan died, Mahalalel died, Jared died, and then comes the 7th name in the line from Adam, Enoch, and the formula breaks. The text says that Enoch lived 65 years and fathered Methuselah, who would go on to be the longest-lived man in the Bible, and that afterward Enoch walked with God for 300 years and had other sons and daughters, and that all the days of Enoch were 365 years. And then, instead of, and he died, it says something else. It says, and Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's it. That's the whole thing. 2 verses. He didn't die, he was taken. The Hebrew verb there, luggage, simply means to take, to seize, to fetch. The same ordinary word you'd use for taking a tool off a shelf. He walked with God, and then he wasn't there anymore. because God had taken him. Now, let's sit with that for a second, because I want you to feel the shape of the hole it leaves. In a list where the entire point is that everybody dies, one man doesn't, and the text offers no explanation whatsoever. It doesn't say where he went. It doesn't say why. It doesn't say what walked with God means, whether it's a description of piety, or something more literal, or something else entirely. It gives you a number, 365, which is suspiciously close to the days in a solar year, and which almost certainly isn't a coincidence. And then it moves on to Methuselah, and the drumbeat resumes. And he died. And he died. If you are a reader in the ancient world, and you believe that this text is the record of God's dealings with the world, and that nothing in it is accidental, then a gap like that is not an omission. It's an invitation. Something happened to Enoch. The text knows what it is. The text isn't saying. And then, one chapter later, in Genesis 6, there's a second gap. And this one is even stranger, and even shorter, and it is the single most important 4 verses in this entire story. The passage says that when human beings began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whichever ones they chose. And then there's a line about God saying that his Spirit will not contend with humanity forever, and setting a limit of 120 years. And then this: the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. And that's all. 4 verses, and then immediately the narrative moves to God seeing the wickedness of humanity, and regretting having made them, and resolving to send a flood. Now, every part of that passage is a problem. Who are the sons of God? The Hebrew is Beneha Elohim, and elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Job, for instance, where the sons of God present themselves before the Lord. That phrase pretty clearly refers to heavenly beings, members of a divine council. So, the plainest reading of Genesis 6 is that supernatural beings took human wives. What are the Nephilim? The word is related to a root meaning to fall, which is why the traditional rendering is the fallen ones, though it's translated in the Old Greek version of the Hebrew Bible as gigantes, giants, which is where the English tradition of giants comes from. The word appears again much later, in the Book of Numbers, when the spies sent into Canaan come back terrified and report that they saw the Nephilim there, and that they felt like grasshoppers by comparison. And why is it here? Why, immediately before the flood, does the text pause to tell you that heavenly beings crossed a boundary they should not have crossed, and produced children who were not supposed to exist? The obvious implication is that this is the cause, that the flood is the response to this. But Genesis never says so. It just places the two things side by side and lets you make of it what you will. Sit with that for a moment, because it's genuinely one of the oddest things in the Hebrew Bible. It reads like a summary of a story the author expected you to already know, like a single paragraph referring to a much longer account, the way a modern writer might mention the Trojan horse in passing without explaining it. And here's the thing: that longer account exists, or at least a version of it exists, and it's in the Book of Enoch. So let's talk about what the Book of Enoch actually is, because this is where people get confused. and the confusion is understandable. There isn't one Book of Enoch. There are 3 separate works from 3 different centuries, in 3 different languages, from 3 different religious communities, and scholars distinguish them by number. There's First Enoch, sometimes called Ethiopic Enoch, which is the big one, the one we'll spend most of the night with. It survives complete only in Ge'ez, the classical liturgical language of Ethiopia. It's the one quoted in the New Testament. There's Second Enoch, sometimes called Slavonic Enoch or the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, which survives in Old Church Slavonic, preserved in Eastern Europe, and which tells a rather different story about Enoch's journey through 10 heavens. And there's Third Enoch, also called the Hebrew Apocalypse of Enoch, or Sefer Hekalot, a much later Jewish mystical text in which Enoch is transformed into an angel named Metatron, and which we'll come to near the end because it's one of the most extraordinary pieces of religious writing I know. Tonight, when I say the Book of Enoch, I mean the first one, unless I say otherwise. And First Enoch is itself not a single book. This matters. It's an anthology, 5 distinct compositions, written at different times by different anonymous authors over the course of roughly 300 years, eventually gathered together under Enoch's name and transmitted as a unit. It's the way the Psalms are a collection rather than a book, or the way the prophetic writings accumulated. The 5 sections, in the order they appear, are these. First, chapters 1 to 36, the Book of the Watchers. This is the famous one. The angels, the descent, the giants, the teaching of forbidden knowledge, the appeal to heaven, the judgment, and Enoch's own journey through the cosmos. Second, chapters 37 to 71, the Book of Parables, sometimes called the Similitudes. 3 visions concerning a figure called the Elect One, and the Son of Man, and the judgment of the kings and the mighty. This is the section that matters most for anyone interested in the origins of Christian messianic language, and it's also the section with the most contested date. Third, chapters 72 to 82, the astronomical book, also called the Book of the Luminaries or the Book of the Heavenly Bodies, a dense, technical, frankly rather dry account of the movements of the sun and moon and stars, the gates through which they rise and set, the lengths of days, the winds. It contains a calendar, and that calendar caused a great deal of trouble. Fourth, chapters 83 to 90, the Book of Dreams, which contains one of the most peculiar and brilliant things in ancient literature, an allegorical retelling of the entire history of Israel, in which every human being is an animal. And fifth, chapters 91 to 108, the Epistle of Enoch, a collection of exhortations and warnings, including the Apocalypse of Weeks, which divides all of history into 10 periods, and a long series of denunciations of the rich. Woven through these, particularly toward the end and in a few interpolated passages, there are also fragments of what seems to have been a separate work about Noah, sometimes called the Book of Noah, which was apparently broken up in its pieces scattered through the Enochic collection by a later editor. So, 5 books, 1 name, 3 centuries of composition, and the oldest parts of it, the astronomical book and the Book of the Watchers, are old. Copies of them, in Aramaic, were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in fragments that paleographers date to the early 2nd century before the Common Era, and the works themselves must be older than the copies. The consensus now puts the earliest material somewhere in the 3rd century BCE, and quite possibly earlier than that. Which means parts of the Book of Enoch are older than the Book of Daniel, older than most of the biblical books people assume came first. This is not a late, derivative curiosity, written by someone who had read the New Testament and wanted to add to it. It is one of the oldest surviving pieces of Jewish apocalyptic literature in existence, and it was hugely influential in its own time. Let's go into it. Let's start with the Watchers. The Book of the Watchers opens not with the angels, but with a kind of overture. Enoch introduces himself as a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, who saw a holy vision in the heavens, and which the angels showed to him. And he says something rather beautiful and slightly unsettling, that he is not speaking for his own generation, but for a remote one which is yet to come, which is a claim the book makes about itself from the very first paragraph. This is not for you. This is for people much later. Keep it. And then it describes God coming forth from his dwelling and treading upon Mount Sinai, and the earth being torn apart, and the mountains melting like wax before the flame. Judgment on all flesh. And in the middle of it, a passage about how everything in nature obeys its appointed order, how the luminaries rise and set as they are told, how the sea keeps its bounds, how the trees put out leaves and shed them in their season, none of them altering their assigned work, everything obedient, everything in place, except human beings, who alone do not keep to what they were given. That's the opening argument of the book, and it's worth holding on to because everything that follows is a variation on it. The cosmos runs like clockwork. Something went wrong that isn't clockwork. Where did the wrongness come from? And then, in chapter 6, the story proper begins. It happened, the text says, when the children of men had multiplied, and beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw them, and desired them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget children. And then one of them, whose name is given as Semyaza, and who is described as their leader, says something that stops you. He says, I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall have to pay the penalty of a great sin. Think about that for a moment. That's not a triumphant declaration of rebellion. That's a nervous ringleader, worried that his friends will lose their nerve and leave him holding it. It's a very small, very human note in a story about supernatural beings. And it's one of the reasons this text has stayed alive for 2,000 years. The author understood something about how people get themselves into terrible decisions together, and the others answer him. Let us all swear an oath and bind ourselves by mutual imprecations not to abandon this plan, but to carry it through. So they swore, and the text says there were 200 of them, and that they descended in the days of Jared, which is a nice touch, because Jared is Enoch's father in the Genesis genealogy, and the name is related to a Hebrew root meaning to descend. The author is doing a piece of etymological wordplay across 2 books. They came down in the days of descent, and the place they came down is named Mount Hermon, which is a real mountain. It's the highest peak in the region, on what is now the border between Syria and Lebanon, close to the modern Golan Heights, snow-capped much of the year, visible from an enormous distance across the northern Levant. It was a sacred mountain long before this text was written, with temples and shrines on its slopes going back a very long way. And the text says they called it Hermon because they swore upon it and bound themselves with mutual imprecations, playing on the Hebrew root herem, meaning a ban, a curse, something devoted and set apart. And then the book does something that is, in its way, the most characteristic thing about the whole Enochic tradition. It gives you a list of names: Semyaza, Herakiel, Ramiel, Kokabil, Temiel, Ramiel, Danel, Ezekiel, Barakiel, Asael, Armaros, Batariel, Ananel, Zakiel, Samsapiel, Satarel, Turel, Yomiel, Sariel, 20 chiefs of tens, and their names are all constructed the same way, ending in El, the Hebrew word for God, the way Michael and Gabriel and Raphael do. Barakiel means something like lightning of God, Kokabio, star of God, Sariel, prince of God. These are not demonic names in origin. They're perfectly ordinary angelic names, which is precisely the point. These are not devils. They are members of the heavenly staff who left their posts. And then the story turns dark. They took wives, each choosing for himself, and they went in to them. And they taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And the women conceived and bore giants. The text gives a size, 300 cubits, which is something like 130 meters, an absurd and clearly symbolic number, though later versions of the text and later traditions vary the figure enormously. And it describes what happens next in a few terrible, escalating sentences. The giants consumed the produce of all the people until the people could no longer sustain them. Then the giants turned against the people and began to devour them. And they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish, and to devour one another's flesh and drink the blood. And then the line that carries the whole moral weight of the passage. And the earth laid accusation against the lawless ones. The earth itself brings the charge, not the people, the ground. Now here's where the story becomes more than a monster story, and where I think its real power lies. Because the sin of the Watchers is not primarily sexual, it's educational. The text says that Azazel, and here the name shifts slightly, Asael in some manuscripts, Azazel in others, and the doubling is one of the clues that this text has more than one source stitched together. Azazel taught men to make swords, and knives, and shields, and breastplates. He made known to them the metals of the earth, and the art of working them, and bracelets, and ornaments, and the use of antimony, and the beautifying of the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures, metallurgy and cosmetics, weapons and eyeshadow, listed together as one crime. And Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting. Armaros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakiel taught astrology. Kokabiel, the constellations. Ezekiel, the knowledge of the clouds. Irakiel, the signs of the earth. Shamsiel, the signs of the sun. And Sariel, the course of the moon. And later, in a passage in the Book of Parables, there's one more. And it's the one that always stops me. An angel named Penemu, who taught the children of men the bitter and the sweet, and taught them the art of writing with ink and paper. And the text adds that many have gone astray through this, from eternity to eternity, and to this day, because human beings were not created for the purpose of confirming their good faith with pen and ink. Writing, listed as forbidden knowledge, taught by a fallen angel. which is a remarkable thing to find inside a book. Somebody sat down with a reed pen and wrote, in ink on papyrus, that writing in ink on papyrus was a corruption taught by a rebel angel. That is either a profound irony the author didn't notice, or one they noticed perfectly well and left in anyway. So, let's slow down and think about what this list actually is, because it isn't random. Metalworking gives you weapons, which gives you war. Cosmetics and jewelry give you seduction and vanity, and the whole apparatus of desire as a social force. Astrology and divination give you the claim to read fate, which is a kind of power over other people. Root cutting and pharmacology give you medicine, and also poison. Writing gives you contracts and records and law, and the ability to bind people with documents rather than trust. What the Watchers taught, in other words, is civilization. All the arts of the settled, urban, organized world, metallurgy, cosmetics, astronomy, medicine, literacy, presented as things humanity was not meant to have, delivered by beings who had no right to deliver them. This is a book with a view about progress. And the view is that the technologies which make complex society possible are also, precisely, the technologies that make cruelty efficient. The same forge makes the plowshare and the sword. And someone in the 3rd or 4th century before the Common Era looked at the world they lived in, a world of Hellenistic kingdoms and professional armies and bureaucracies and vast wealth and greater weapons than anyone had seen, and wrote an origin story for it, and made the origin illegitimate. And here's what makes it more than a grumble about the modern world. And here's the theological engine of the entire book. In the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the origin of human trouble is human. Adam and Eve are given a command, and they break it, and the consequences follow from their choice. It's a story about responsibility. In the Book of Enoch, the origin of human trouble is not human. It comes down the mountain from outside. Human beings are, in this account, the victims of a heavenly crime, corrupted by beings vastly more powerful than themselves, taught things they weren't ready for, preyed upon by monsters they didn't ask for. That is a fundamentally different answer to the problem of evil, and you can understand exactly why it appealed to the people who first heard it, if you know what was happening to them. But let's stay with the story, because it hasn't finished, and the next part is the part I find most affecting. The cry of the dying goes up to heaven, and 4 archangels, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, look down from the sanctuary of heaven and see the blood being shed upon the earth and all the lawlessness being done. And they take the case to God. And what they say is essentially a formal complaint, and it has an edge to it. They say, "You see what Azazel has done, who has taught all unrighteousness on earth and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven. And Semyaza, to whom you gave authority to rule over his associates. And they have gone in to the daughters of men, and lain with them, and defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sins. And the souls of those who have died are crying out to the gates of heaven, and their groaning has ascended, and cannot cease because of the lawless deeds on earth." And then, the sharp part, "And you know all things before they come to pass. And you see these things, and you permit them, and you do not tell us what we ought to do about it." That is an accusation, gently phrased, but an accusation. The angels are asking why God is letting it happen, and the response is a set of commissions, each archangel given a task, and the language of them is worth hearing. Uriel is sent to Noah to warn him that the end approaches and that a deluge is coming to destroy everything, and to tell him how to escape. Raphael is told, "Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him in, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the great day of judgment he shall be cast into the fire." Gabriel is sent against the giants and told to set them against one another in battle, so that they destroy each other. And Michael is sent to bind Semyaza and his associates, and to imprison them beneath the hills of the earth for 70 generations, until the day of their judgment, when they will be led away to the abyss of fire. Notice what's being described. Not annihilation. Imprisonment. Bound in darkness, under rocks in a pit in the desert, until a judgment that hasn't happened yet. And notice the detail about Azazel's face being covered so that he may not see light, which is a peculiarly cruel and particular thing to specify, and which has a long afterlife in the imagery of hell. And then the text answers a question that Genesis never even raises, and the answer became one of the most influential ideas in the ancient world. What happened to the giants? They died, killed in the war Gabriel provoked among them, and finished by the flood. But the text says that because they were born of spirit and of flesh, they were something in between. Their bodies were of earth, and returned to earth, but their spirits were not earthly, and could not go where human spirits go. And so, the text says, "The spirits of the giants remain on the earth. Evil spirits they shall be called. They will not eat, nor thirst, but they will be invisible, and they will afflict, and oppress, and destroy, and cause trouble upon the earth. They will rise up against the children of men and against the women, because they have proceeded from them." That is the origin of demons. And it's worth understanding how significant this is. In the Hebrew Bible, demonology is thin and inconsistent. There are a few scattered references to desert creatures and to something called a shaddam. But there is no systematic account of what evil spirits are, where they came from, or why they are here. By the 1st century of the Common Era, there is one, and it's this one. The demonology that you find in the Gospels, with unclean spirits that possess people, that speak, that ask not to be sent to the abyss, that have to go somewhere when they're expelled and drive a herd of pigs into a lake because they have nowhere else to be. That whole picture of homeless spirits looking for a body sits very comfortably on top of the Enochic explanation. Disembodied hybrid spirits, no bodies of their own, no place in the world, restless and destructive. The Book of Enoch didn't necessarily invent that idea single-handedly, but it is the earliest place we have where it's written down and explained, and it clearly represents a way of thinking that was widespread in Jewish circles in the last centuries before the Common Era. And for anyone reading the New Testament and wondering where all that demon material came from, given how little of it is in the Hebrew Bible, this is a large part of the answer. Now, where is Enoch in all this? He appears in chapter 12, and the way he appears is quietly extraordinary. The text says that before all these things happened, Enoch was hidden, and none of the children of men knew where he was hidden or where he lived, or what had become of him, and all his activities were with the holy ones and with the watchers in his days. So Enoch, at this point in the story, has already been taken. He's already living with the angels, which means the man Genesis says walked with God and was not, because God took him, is here on the other side of that sentence, in the place he was taken to. And an angel calls to him, Enoch, scribe of righteousness, and gives him an errand. Go, the angel says, and tell the watchers of heaven, who have left the high heaven and defiled themselves with women, that they have done as the children of earth do, and taken wives, and have wrought great destruction, and tell them that they shall have no peace nor forgiveness of sin. So Enoch is sent as a messenger to the fallen angels to deliver a verdict, and this is where the whole thing turns strange and rather moving. He finds them, and the first one named is Azazel, and Enoch delivers the sentence, "There will be no peace for you. A severe sentence has gone forth against you, and you will have no rest." And then he goes to the others, and they are afraid. The text says they were all afraid, and trembling and fear seized them. And they begged him, they begged Enoch, a human being, to write a petition for them, asking for forgiveness, and to read it before the Lord of heaven, because they themselves, the text says, could no longer speak to God, nor lift up their eyes to heaven, for shame of the sins for which they had been condemned. Think about that image. Beings of enormous power, who came down from heaven of their own free will, now unable to look up, asking a man to write a letter for them, because they cannot bring themselves to speak. And Enoch does it. He writes the petition, and he takes it and goes and sits down by the waters of Dan, which is a real place, a spring at the foot of Mount Hermon that is one of the sources of the Jordan River, and if you know that landscape, the geography here is completely coherent, and he sits by the water and reads their petition aloud, and keeps reading it until he falls asleep. He falls asleep reading, and in his sleep visions fall upon him, and he sees a vision of chastisement, and a voice tells him to go and speak to the sons of heaven and reprove them. And then he wakes and goes to them and tells them what he has been shown. And what he says is essentially this: your petition has been refused. And the reason he gives them is a piece of theology in 2 sentences. He says that spirits, being immortal, do not need wives, because they do not die, and therefore they do not need children. Heaven was their proper dwelling, and they had no need to reproduce. But human beings were given wives because they die, and children are how mortals continue. You have exchanged the eternal for the mortal, he says, and you will have no peace. Now, before we go further, let's stay a moment with what happens in the middle of that sequence, because it's one of the most important passages in the history of Jewish and Christian mysticism, and it is genuinely awesome in the old sense of that word. Enoch describes being lifted up. He says the clouds and the mist called him, and the course of the stars and the lightning sped and hastened him, and the winds gave him wings and lifted him upward and bore him into heaven. And he comes to a wall built of crystal, surrounded by tongues of fire. And he passes through the fire and comes to a great house, also built of crystal, whose walls are like a mosaic of crystal, and its floor is crystal, and its ceiling is like the path of the stars and lightnings, with fiery cherubim between them, and the heaven above is water. Flaming fire surrounds the walls, and the doors burn with fire. And he says, I entered into that house, and it was hot as fire and cold as ice. There was nothing inside. Fear covered me, and trembling seized me. Hot as fire and cold as ice. Nothing inside. That single line does more to convey the terror of the numinous than pages of description could. And then he sees a second house, greater than the first, built entirely of flames, and everything about it surpasses the first in glory and splendor, so that he cannot describe it. Its floor is fire, and above it are lightnings and the paths of the stars, and its ceiling is a blazing fire. And inside it there is a lofty throne, and its appearance is like crystal, and its wheels are like the shining sun, and there is the vision of cherubim. And from underneath the throne come streams of flaming fire, so that he cannot look upon it, and the great glory sits upon it, and his raiment shines more brightly than the sun, and is whiter than any snow. And no angel can enter, and no flesh can behold him. The flaming fire is round about him, and a great fire stands before him, and none of those around him can come near. 10,000 times 10,000 stand before him, yet he needs no counselor. And Enoch says, "Until then I had been prostrate on my face, trembling. And the Lord called me with his own mouth and said, 'Come here, Enoch, and hear my word. Sit with that a moment. There's no hurry.' That passage, the crystal walls, the throne with wheels of fire, the streams of flame, the countless attendants, is one of the earliest extended descriptions we have of the heavenly throne room in any Jewish text. It's clearly building on the vision in the first chapter of Ezekiel and on Daniel chapter 7, but it develops the imagery enormously, and it becomes the fountainhead of an entire tradition of Jewish mysticism, the Merkabah or chariot tradition, in which mystics sought to ascend through the heavens to behold the throne, passing through gates and palaces, each guarded, each dangerous. And notice the emotional register. Enoch is not exalted here. He is not comfortable. He is face down and shaking in a room that is simultaneously freezing and burning, and the only reason he can be there at all is that he is specifically called by name. After the audience, Enoch is taken on a series of journeys, and these occupy the second half of the Book of the Watchers, and they have a tone I find genuinely soothing to move through, a slow, wandering, geographical strangeness, like being shown around a very large and very old house by someone who knows every room. His guides are angels, chiefly Uriel and Raphael, and also Raguel and Michael, and they take him to the ends of the earth and beyond. He sees the place of the winds, where the winds are kept, and the cornerstone of the earth. He sees the four winds which bear up the firmament. He sees the pillars of heaven. He sees a chasm with columns of heavenly fire, and beyond the ends of the earth a place with no firmament above and no earth beneath, a waste and terrible place. And he sees 7 stars bound together like great burning mountains. And he asks what they are, and the angel, Uriel, tells him, "These are the stars which transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and they are bound here for 10,000 years, the time of their sin. Stars imprisoned for disobedience, because in this cosmology the heavenly bodies are living, obedient beings, and their perfect regularity is a moral achievement, and a star that failed to rise on time would be a rebel. He is shown a burning place beyond the mountains in the west, and told this is the prison of the angels, and that they will be confined there forever. And then he's shown something quieter, and, to my mind, more interesting. A great mountain of hard rock with 4 hollow places in it, deep and wide and smooth. And he asks, "Why are these hollow places smooth and deep and dark?" And Raphael answers, "These hollow places have been created for this very purpose, that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble in them. Here their souls are separated. There is a division for the spirits of the righteous, where there is a bright spring of water, and a division for sinners, who die and are buried in the earth and upon whom judgment has not come in their lifetime, and a division for those who make their complaint, who disclose concerning their destruction, when they were slain in the days of the sinners, and a division for those who were slain themselves, the souls of those who died righteous." This is one of the earliest clear descriptions in Jewish literature of the dead being separated after death, sorted into compartments according to what they did and what was done to them, and held there awaiting a final judgment. Because the older Hebrew picture of the afterlife is thin and rather bleak, Sheol, the pit, a shadowy, undifferentiated place where everyone goes, where there is no memory and no praise, and where the distinction between the good and the wicked simply doesn't apply. Job says that in Sheol, the small and the great are there alike, and the servant is free from his master. What the Book of the Watchers gives you instead is a holding facility with divisions, judgment deferred, but coming, and that idea that the accounts have not yet been settled, but will be, becomes absolutely central to both Judaism and Christianity in the centuries that follow. The journeys go on. He is taken to a mountain range in the middle of the earth, 7 mountains, 3 to the east and 3 to the south, and a deep and rugged valley between them. And on one of them, there is a tree unlike any other, its fragrance beyond all fragrance, its leaves and blossoms and wood never withering, its fruit beautiful, like the clusters of a palm. And Enoch asks about it, and Michael tells him, "This high mountain which you have seen, whose summit is like the throne of God, is his throne, where the Holy Great One will sit when he descends to visit the earth with goodness. And as for this fragrant tree, no mortal is permitted to touch it until the great judgment. Then it shall be given to the righteous and the holy. Its fruit shall be for food to the elect, and it shall be transplanted to the holy place, to the temple of the Lord." And then he says, "Then they shall rejoice with joy and be glad, and into the holy place shall they enter, and the fragrance of it shall be in their bones, and they shall live a long life on earth, such as your fathers lived. The fragrance shall be in their bones." That's a lovely, strange, physical way to describe blessedness. He travels east and south and sees valleys of spices and trees of frankincense and myrrh and cinnamon. He sees the mountains of the east and the 7 rivers. He sees the garden of righteousness, and in it the tree of wisdom, and the angel tells him this is the tree from which his ancestors, the old man and the old woman who were before him, ate and learned wisdom, and their eyes were opened, and they were driven out of the garden. He sees the ends of the earth in every direction, and the gates through which the stars come out, and the storehouses of hail and frost and snow and mist and dew, and the treasuries of the winds. And each time he says some version of the same thing. "And I saw, and I blessed the Lord of glory, who has made great and glorious wonders, to show the greatness of his work to the angels and to the spirits of men, that they might praise his work and all his creation, that they might see the work of his might and praise the great work of his hands, and bless him forever." That refrain runs through the whole of the tour. He sees something enormous, and he blesses, sees something else, and blesses. It's a rhythm that was probably intended for reading aloud, and it has the cadence of a liturgy, which is why, even in translation, and even at 2,000 years' distance, that part of the book is such a peaceful thing to move through slowly. Now, we should talk about the astronomical book, because it's the least read and possibly the oldest section, and because the argument it started had real consequences. Chapters 72 to 82 are given over to Uriel showing Enoch the mechanics of the heavens. And it's technical, genuinely, laboriously technical, in a way that surprises people who come to Enoch expecting angels and giants. The text goes through it month by month, gate by gate, giving the changing length of the day and night as ratios, the day being 11 parts, and the night 7, and then 10 and 8, and then 9 and 9 at the equinox, and so on. It describes the phases of the moon in terms of 14 parts of its light, added and subtracted. It describes the winds and the 4 quarters of the heavens, and the number that comes out of it, the number of days in the year, is 364, not 365 and a quarter, which is roughly correct, not 354, which is the length of 12 lunar months and the basis of most ancient calendars in the region. 364. Now, 364 is a beautiful number if you want an orderly calendar, and a terrible one if you want an accurate one. It's beautiful because it divides perfectly. 364 is 52 weeks exactly, which means that in a 364-day calendar, every date falls on the same day of the week every single year, forever. New Year's Day is always the same weekday. Every festival is always the same weekday. The calendar never drifts against the 7-day cycle. It's a system in which the Sabbath and the festival calendar are permanently, mathematically aligned, and for a community that regarded the Sabbath as sacred and inviolable, that is a very attractive property, because in a lunar calendar the festivals wander through the week and sometimes collide with the Sabbath in awkward ways. And it's terrible, because the actual solar year is about 365 and a quarter days, which means a 364-day calendar loses a day and a quarter every year. After 30 years, you're a month out. After a century, you're celebrating the Spring Harvest Festival in the middle of winter. There is no mechanism described in the text for correcting this. Some scholars think there must have been an intercalation practice that simply isn't recorded. Others think the authors regarded the number as divinely revealed and were not much interested in whether the fields agreed. And here is why it matters. The text is not neutral about this. It is furious about it. In chapter 80, and again in 82, there are passages warning that in the days of the sinners, the years will be shortened, and the moon will alter its order, and that people will err and take the luminaries for gods, and, crucially, that sinners will confuse the calendar, so that the year will not come out right, and the holy days will be observed on the wrong days. The author of the astronomical book believes that his calendar is the one written on the heavenly tablets, revealed by the archangel Uriel, and that anybody using a different one is not merely mistaken, but in rebellion, because if you observe the Day of Atonement on the wrong day, then, in the view of this writer, you are not observing it at all. the whole ritual apparatus of the temple becomes void. The offerings are made at the wrong hour, by the wrong reckoning, to no effect. And this was not a hypothetical dispute. The community at Qumran, by the Dead Sea, who preserved copies of Enoch and whose own sectarian writings survive, used a 364-day calendar. And one of the reasons they gave for having separated from the temple establishment in Jerusalem was precisely that the temple was keeping the festivals on the wrong days. Think about that for a moment. A dispute about arithmetic, about how many days there are in a year, became one of the fault lines along which a religious community broke apart. People withdrew into the desert and built a settlement and copied scrolls and organized their entire lives around a calendar they believed the establishment had abandoned. Calendars are never only calendars. A calendar tells you who is in charge of time. So let's back up now and set the scene properly, because to understand why anyone was writing books like this at all, you need to know what was happening in Judea in the centuries when they were written. And this is, I think, one of the more genuinely interesting periods in history, and one of the least well known. By the 4th century, before the Common Era, the Jewish community in Judea had already been through catastrophe and partial recovery. Jerusalem and its temple had been destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE, and the elite deported. Then the Persians had conquered Babylon and permitted a return, and a second temple had been built, smaller, poorer, but functioning. Judea existed as a small temple state under Persian administration, run largely by its priesthood. And then Alexander the Great arrived, and the entire eastern Mediterranean changed shape. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his generals carved up the empire, and Judea found itself on the border between two of the resulting kingdoms, the Ptolemies in Egypt to the south, and the Seleucids in Syria and Mesopotamia to the north. For a century, it was under Ptolemaic rule. Then, around 200 BCE, the Seleucids took it, and with Greek rule came Greek culture, and this is the pressure point. Greek language, Greek education, the gymnasium, Greek civic institutions, Greek names, Greek philosophy, Greek styles of dress and athletics, and social organization. An entire cosmopolitan package that was genuinely attractive to elite young men who wanted careers in a Greek-speaking world, and genuinely appalling to those who saw in it the dissolution of everything that made them who they were. Judean society divided over it. There were families who adopted Greek names and Greek manners and built a gymnasium in Jerusalem, and there were others who regarded that as apostasy. And then it exploded. In the 1600s of the Seleucid era, the 170s BCE by our reckoning, the high priesthood, which was supposed to be hereditary and sacred, was effectively put up for sale. A man named Jason bought it from the Seleucid king by outbidding his own brother. Then a man named Menelaus outbid Jason. The office at the center of the religion was now a commodity. And then Antiochus IV, who styled himself Epiphanes, God manifest, did something no ruler in that region had done before. Somewhere around 167 BCE, he moved against the practice of Judaism itself. The sources describe the temple being plundered, sacrifices to the God of Israel being stopped, an altar or a cult object of Zeus being installed in the temple, the Sabbath and circumcision being outlawed, and copies of the Torah being destroyed. 2nd Maccabees describes mothers who had circumcised their infants being executed, with the children hung around their necks. Whether every detail is accurate or heightened by later writers, something along those lines happened, and it was unprecedented. What followed was the Maccabean Revolt, a rural, priestly family, Mattathias and his sons, who took to the hills and fought a guerrilla war, and against every expectation won, and rededicated the temple in 164 BCE, which is the event commemorated at Hanukkah. Now, hold all that in mind, and think about what it does to a person's picture of the world. You believe you live in a universe governed by a just God who rewards the righteous and punishes the wicked, and that this happens in this life. Because that is broadly the position of most of the older biblical literature. And then you watch the most faithful people you know being tortured to death precisely for their faithfulness, while the collaborators prosper, and the men who bought the high priesthood keep their positions and their houses. The old framework cannot absorb that. It breaks. And what emerges to replace it is apocalyptic, which is not, despite the modern usage, primarily about the end of the world. The word means an uncovering, a revelation, a pulling back of the curtain. And its core proposition is this: what you can see is not all there is. There's a hidden reality behind the visible one. There are heavenly beings and cosmic forces at work behind the political events you are living through. History has a shape and a schedule, already written, already determined. And the injustice you are watching is temporary, because there is a judgment coming. Not a metaphorical one, an actual one, at which the accounts will be settled, and the dead will be raised, and the righteous who died horribly will be vindicated, and the wicked who died comfortably will not. That is the framework the Book of Enoch belongs to, and it's why the book looks the way it does. The cosmic tours, the named angels, the fixed heavenly tablets on which everything is already written, the compartments where the dead wait, the coming judgment, all of it is an answer to the question, why do the faithful suffer? And it answers by saying, because you are looking at an unfinished process, and you have not been shown the end of it. Which raises the obvious question, why write it under Enoch's name? Because nobody thinks Enoch wrote the Book of Enoch. The book is what scholars call pseudepigraphal, falsely attributed, and it belongs to a very large body of ancient Jewish and Christian literature, written in the name of some venerable ancient figure. Books attributed to Moses, to Abraham, to Isaiah, to Ezra, to Baruch, to Adam, to the 12 sons of Jacob. To modern ears, this sounds like forgery, and there's no point pretending the ancient world had no concept of literary fraud, because it did. But it's not quite the same act. In a tradition where revelation is understood to have been given long ago, and where the job of the present is to interpret and transmit rather than invent, writing under an ancient name is partly a claim about the source of the material, a way of saying, this is not my private opinion, this belongs to the stream that comes down from the beginning. And it's partly a solution to a practical problem. A text that claims to reveal secrets of the cosmos has to come from somebody who was in a position to learn them. And Enoch was the perfect candidate, for exactly the reason we started with. Genesis says he was taken, which means he's the one figure in the primeval history who indisputably went somewhere and, at least in principle, could have come back with information. There's more to it than that, though, because Enoch's position in the genealogy, 7th from Adam is significant in itself, 7 being the number of completeness, and because there's an older layer underneath all this from Mesopotamia. In the Sumerian and Babylonian king lists, there's a tradition of antediluvian kings, rulers before the flood, with enormously long reigns. And in one version, the 7th of them is a king of Sippar named Enmeduranki, who is said in a Babylonian text to have been taken up into the presence of the gods Shamash and Adad, who showed him the tablet of the gods and taught him the secrets of divination, how to read oil on water, how to interpret omens, the secrets of heaven and earth, and who then sent him back to teach these things to the men of Nippur, Sippar, and Babylon, founding a guild of diviners, 7th in the line, taken up, shown heavenly secrets, associated with the sun god, and Sippar was the cult center of Shamash, the sun. And Enoch lives 365 years, the days of the solar year, and the book attributed to him contains a solar calendar. That is a lot of coincidence. The most reasonable reading is that Jewish writers, particularly during and after the Babylonian exile, encountered a well-developed Mesopotamian tradition about a pre-flood sage who ascended and received astronomical and divinatory knowledge, and recognized in their own Genesis genealogy a figure who fit the slot, and then developed him, with the crucial theological difference that Enoch's knowledge comes from the one God through his angels, not from a pantheon, which tells you something about how these traditions actually grow, not in sealed containers, in contact, in argument, in borrowing and reworking, in one culture taking an idea from another and turning it to a different purpose. So let's carry on through the 5 books, because we've done the Watchers and the Astronomy, and now we come to the Book of Dreams, which contains something quite unlike anything else in ancient literature. Chapters 83 to 90. Enoch tells his son Methuselah about 2 visions he had when he was young, before he was married. The first is short, a vision of heaven collapsing and the earth being swallowed, which his grandfather Mahalalel interprets as the coming flood, and Enoch prays that a remnant might be preserved. The second is the one that matters, and it runs for 7 chapters, and it is called the Animal Apocalypse. It is the entire history of the world, from Adam to the author's own present, retold as a story about livestock. Adam is a white bull, Eve is a heifer, Cain is a black bull, Abel a red one. Noah is a white bull who becomes a man. The generations of humanity are cattle, and then Jacob's descendants become sheep. And from that point on, Israel is a flock of sheep, and every other nation is a different animal, and each one is chosen with a certain amount of editorial feeling. The Egyptians are wolves, the Philistines are dogs, the Assyrians and Babylonians are lions and tigers, the Edomites are wild boars, the Greeks are eagles and vultures and ravens. Moses is a sheep who becomes a man and builds a house, the house being the temple, and the tower on it the sanctuary. The fallen angels of the Watcher story appear as stars that fall from heaven and become bulls among the cattle, and their offspring are elephants and camels and asses. Elijah is a sheep who is taken up. The blinding of the flock over and over is the recurring image for Israel going astray, sheep who cannot see, wandering off, being eaten. And the framework the author uses for the whole period of foreign domination is this: God, weary of the flock's disobedience, hands them over to 70 shepherds, and gives each shepherd a period to pasture them, and instructs them to destroy only a set number of the sheep. And the shepherds exceed their quota. They destroy far more than they were told to. And there is another angel who watches and writes it all down in a book, every excess, to be read out at the judgment. So there is a record. Somebody is keeping the record. Everything that has been done beyond what was permitted is written in a book, and it will be read aloud. And the vision runs forward through the Babylonian conquest, and the return, and the rebuilding, and then something happens in the narrative. Small lambs are born to the white sheep, and they begin to open their eyes and to cry out to the flock, but the flock will not listen. And then one of them grows a great horn, and the ravens fly at it and try to break it, and cannot. That great horn is almost certainly Judas Maccabeus, which is what lets scholars date this section. The text describes the Maccabean revolt as in progress, and the horn as not yet broken, and appears to anticipate a divine intervention that hasn't happened yet. So the animal apocalypse was probably written around 165 to 160 BCE. It's contemporary with the crisis itself, written by somebody living through it. And it ends with judgment, the fallen stars and the wayward shepherds thrown into an abyss of fire, and the blinded sheep judged, and then a new house built, greater than the first, and all the surviving sheep gathered into it. And the last image is that all the animals of the earth and the birds of the sky come and bow down to the sheep and make petition to them and are transformed. And then a white bull is born with great horns, and all the beasts and the birds fear him and make petition to him always, and all become white bulls again, which is a resolution that returns to the beginning. Everything becomes what Adam was. I find the animal apocalypse strangely beautiful, and I think it's because of the flatness of the device. Terrible things happen, massacres, exiles, the destruction of the temple, and they happen to sheep, and are done by wolves and lions and boars, and the effect isn't to trivialize them. It's the opposite. It makes the whole of human history look like something happening in a field, watched from a distance by someone taking notes. The fifth section, the Epistle of Enoch, is different again in tone. Chapters 91 to 108, presented as Enoch's final testament to his children. Embedded in it is the Apocalypse of Weeks, which is one of the most compressed and interesting things in the collection, and which is out of order in the Ethiopic manuscripts. The Aramaic fragments from Qumran show that the sections were originally arranged differently, and that a scribe somewhere along the line moved a block of text. The Apocalypse of Weeks divides all of history into 10 weeks, each week being an era. The first week, Enoch himself, born at the end of it, when righteousness still endures. The second, great wickedness and the flood, and a man saved, Noah. The third, a man chosen as the plant of righteousness, Abraham. The fourth, the law given, Moses. The fifth, the temple built. The sixth, blindness, and the burning of the house, and the scattering of the people, the Babylonian destruction. The seventh week, an apostate generation, and at the end of it, the elect are chosen and given sevenfold instruction concerning all of creation. The seventh week is the author's own time, which means the author places himself precisely at the pivot of history, the moment when the true instruction is given to a chosen few, just before everything turns. And then, the eighth week is a week of righteousness, when the righteous are given a sword to execute judgment on the oppressors, and a house is built for the great king. The 9th, the world is written down for destruction, and all humanity looks to the path of uprightness. And the 10th, judgment upon the watchers, and the first heaven passes away, and a new heaven appears. And afterward there will be many weeks without number, forever, in goodness and righteousness. And sin shall be mentioned no more. That is a fully worked out theology of history. Deterministic, scheduled, already written on tablets, moving toward an end that is not a catastrophe but a settling. And the rest of the epistle is something I'd like to dwell on for a moment, because it's the part of the Book of Enoch that people almost never mention, and it's the part with the most obvious ethical force. It is, essentially, a sustained attack on the rich. Woe to you who acquire silver and gold in unrighteousness, and say, we have become rich with riches and have possessions, and have acquired everything we desire. Now let us do what we have planned, for we have gathered silver, and our granaries are full, and as many as water are the servants of our houses. Like water your lies shall flow away, for your riches will not remain, but will speedily ascend from you. Woe to you who build your houses with the toil of others, and every part of them of brick and stone of sin. Woe to you who devour the finest of the wheat, and drink the strength of the root of the fountain, and tread underfoot the lowly with your power. Woe to those who write down lying words and words of error. They write and lead many astray with their lies. And to the poor and the oppressed, the text says something else. It says, fear not, you who have suffered, for you shall have healing. A bright light shall shine upon you, and you shall hear the voice of rest from heaven. Take courage. Formerly you were put to shame through ill and affliction, but now you shall shine as the lights of heaven. The gates of heaven shall be opened to you. And there's a passage that addresses head-on the thing that makes all of this necessary. The fact that the righteous die badly, and the wicked die comfortably, and that both end in the same ground. The text imagines the objection being made. It says that the souls of the dead complain, saying, in our lifetime we were oppressed, and became food for sinners, and they laid their yoke heavily upon us. And it acknowledges the plain observation that the sinner dies too, and is buried in fine linen, and nothing happens to him. And its answer is that the accounts are not closed at the grave, that the spirits of the righteous are held and remembered, and that everything done has been written down before the Most High, and that a judgment is coming which is not a metaphor. Whether or not you find that persuasive, it's worth noticing what it's for. This is not speculation for its own sake. It is a text written to people who were being crushed, telling them that what was happening to them was seen and recorded and would be answered. Which leaves one section of 1st Enoch that we've skipped over, and I saved it deliberately because it's the most consequential and the most argued about. The Book of Parables, chapters 37 to 71. It's presented as 3 parables, or similitudes revealed to Enoch. And the setting is again the heavens, and again there is a throne, and again a judgment is coming. But there is a figure in these chapters who does not appear anywhere else in Enoch, and who is described in language that will sound extremely familiar to anyone who has read the Gospels. He is called, at various points, the Righteous One, the Elect One, the Anointed One, which is what Messiah means, and most significantly, the Son of Man. Now, the phrase Son of Man in Hebrew and Aramaic is ordinarily just an idiom meaning a human being, a member of the species. In Ezekiel, God addresses the prophet as Son of Man dozens of times, and it means something like mortal. That's all. But in the 7th chapter of Daniel, written during the same crisis under Antiochus, there's a vision in which 4 beasts rise out of the sea, representing 4 kingdoms, and then the Ancient of Days takes his seat on a fiery throne. And one, like a son of man, comes with the clouds of heaven, and is presented before him, and is given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples should serve him, and his dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away. In Daniel, the figure is described as one like a son of man, that is, someone in human form, as opposed to the beasts. And the text goes on to interpret the figure in terms of the holy ones of the Most High, so it may be a collective symbol rather than an individual. What the Book of Parables does is take that Daniel figure and turn him into a person, a definite person with a title, pre-existent, hidden with God, destined to be revealed, seated on the throne of glory, exercising judgment over the kings of the earth. And that is, in outline, the picture of the Son of Man that appears in the Gospels, where it is by a wide margin Jesus' most frequent self-designation, and where it is used in contexts of coming judgment, of sitting on a throne of glory, of coming with the clouds. So the question of when the Book of Parables was written becomes rather important. And here is the difficulty. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, fragments were found of every section of 1st Enoch, the Watchers, the astronomical book, the Book of Dreams, the Epistle, multiple copies of some of them, every section except one. There is not a single fragment of the Book of Parables at Qumran. J.T. Milik, the Polish scholar who published the Aramaic Enoch fragments in 1976, and who was one of the great figures of Qumran scholarship, took that absence as decisive, and argued that the parables were a Christian composition from around the 3rd century of the Common Era, that is, written after the Gospels, and influenced by them rather than the other way round. That view has not held. The consensus that has emerged over the last few decades runs the other way, for a number of reasons. The parables contain no identifiably Christian content, no crucifixion, no resurrection, no Jesus, nothing about the church, which would be extraordinary in a Christian composition. Their concerns are thoroughly Jewish and thoroughly of the Second Temple period. And there's a passage referring to trouble caused by the Parthians and Medes, which fits a period around the middle of the 1st century before the Common Era, when Parthian incursions into the region were a live concern. So most scholars now date the Book of Parables somewhere between roughly the late 1st century BCE and the early 1st century CE, which is to say, around the time of, or shortly before, the beginnings of Christianity. And as for its absence from Qumran, the most likely explanation is simply that the Qumran community, which had its own strong views, either didn't have it or didn't want it. Absence of evidence in a cache of fragmentary scrolls from one particular sect is not strong evidence of absence in the wider world. What that means, if the dating holds, is that when the phrase Son of Man was used in 1st century Judea in a context of judgment and glory, there was already a body of literature in circulation that had given that phrase a very specific weight. It wasn't a blank term, it came loaded. And I want to be careful here, because This is territory where people often want to prove more than the evidence supports in one direction or the other. The honest statement is this: the Book of Parables shows that ideas which were once assumed to be Christian innovations were circulating in Jewish apocalyptic circles beforehand. That doesn't tell you what any individual believed or intended. It tells you what vocabulary was available, and what a listener in that time and place might have heard. And then, at the very end of the parables, in chapter 71, there's a twist that nobody quite knows what to do with. Enoch is taken up into the heaven of heavens, and he sees the house built of crystals and tongues of living fire, and the Ancient of Days with his head white like wool, and the angels beyond number. And he falls on his face, and an angel comes to him, Michael, and says, "This is the Son of Man, who is born unto righteousness, and righteousness abides over him, and the righteousness of the Ancient of Days does not forsake him." Except the text in the manuscripts appears to address this to Enoch as an identification of Enoch himself. You are the Son of Man. The one who has been hidden and preserved and pre-existent and destined to judge is you, the man who was taken. Scholars have argued about that chapter for a century. Some think it's a later addition. Some think the whole of the parables was building to it. Some think there's a manuscript problem. But if it's read straightforwardly, then a human being who walked with God is revealed at the end of the book to have been, all along, the heavenly figure the book has been describing. If you're drifting at this point, that's just fine. Let it wash past. We're going to move now from what's in the book to what happened to the book, which is in some ways an even better story. Let's go to the caves. In late 1946 or early 1947, the date isn't certain, and the story exists in several versions. A young Bedouin shepherd of the Ta'amira tribe, usually named as Muhammad ed-Dib, Muhammad the Wolf, was on the cliffs above the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, near a ruin called Khirbat Qumran, looking for a lost goat. The most repeated version has him throwing a stone into a small opening in the rock and hearing something break. He came back with a companion and went in and found jars. And inside some of the jars, wrapped in linen, blackened with age, scrolls. They had no idea what they had. The scrolls went through the hands of antiquities dealers in Bethlehem, including a cobbler and dealer known as Kando. And eventually, some were bought by the Syrian Orthodox Metropolitan Mar Athanasius Yeshua Samuel, and some by Eleazar Sukenik of the Hebrew University, who acquired his in November 1947, in the days immediately around the United Nations vote on the partition of Palestine, in circumstances of considerable danger. 4 of the scrolls Mar Samuel had eventually ended up being advertised for sale in the Wall Street Journal in 1954, in the classified section, under Miscellaneous for Sale. The biblical manuscripts, it said, dating back to at least 200 BCE, would be an ideal gift to an educational or religious institution by an individual or group. They were purchased through an intermediary by Sukenik's son, Yigael Yadin, who was an archaeologist and had also been the Israeli Army's chief of staff. Over the following decade, 11 caves in the cliffs around Qumran yielded fragments of something like 900 manuscripts. And Cave 4, discovered in 1952, was the Mother Lode and the Nightmare. Around 15,000 fragments from several hundred separate manuscripts most of them small, many the size of a fingernail, jumbled together after 2,000 years of decay and rodents. And among them were pieces of Enoch, in Aramaic, the original language. 11 manuscripts of Enochic material were identified in Cave 4 alone, 4 containing parts of the astronomical book, 7 containing parts of the Watchers, the Book of Dreams, and the Epistle. The oldest of them, on paleographic grounds, was dated by Milik to around 200 BCE, or slightly earlier, which settled a long argument. Before Qumran, it was possible to maintain, and some did, that First Enoch was a late composition, perhaps even a Christian one, and that its apparent influence on the New Testament ran the other way. The Aramaic fragments made that untenable. Here were physical copies, in the ground, from the 2nd century before the Common Era, containing the same text that had come down through the Greek and then the Ge'ez. They also confirmed something about the shape of the collection. The Book of Parables, as I mentioned, is absent, and the astronomical book at Qumran is considerably longer and more detailed than the version preserved in the Ethiopic, which means the Ethiopic version is an abridgment. Somebody, at some point, decided that the astronomical tables did not need to be copied in full, which is a very human editorial decision, and one I have some sympathy with. And there was something else in the caves, a work that isn't in First Enoch at all, and which we'd known only by name and by a handful of quotations. The Book of Giants. The Book of Giants tells the story of the Watchers from the point of view of their children. And the giants have names, and one of them is Gilgamesh, the hero of the Mesopotamian epic, appearing here as one of the monstrous offspring of fallen angels, which is a startling piece of cultural crossover. Another is called Hubabish, or Hahya, and the fragments contain a scene in which 2 of the giants have dreams, troubling dreams, of a tablet being washed clean of writing, of a great tree being cut down so that only one root remains, of water rising, and they cannot interpret them. And so the giants send one of their number, named Mahaway, on a journey to find Enoch, who is far away at the ends of the earth, so that he can read the dreams for them. The giants, sensing that something is coming, send a messenger to the one man who might know, and Enoch's answer is the flood. And the Book of Giants had one further and very strange afterlife. In the 3rd century of the Common Era, a religious teacher named Mani, in Mesopotamia, founded the religion we call Manichaeism, a dualist faith that spread from Spain to China and was for a time a serious rival to Christianity. Mani wrote his own scriptures, and among them was a Book of Giants, clearly based on this Jewish one, and it traveled with his religion across Asia. Fragments of the Manichaean Book of Giants have been recovered from the Turfan Oasis in western China, in Middle Persian and Sogdian and Uyghur. So, a story about the children of fallen angels, written in Aramaic in Judea in perhaps the 3rd century before the Common Era, was still being copied 1,000 years later in Central Asia, in languages its authors had never heard of. Books go a long way. Now, let's follow the book forward, into the 1st centuries of the Common Era, and to the reason so many people have heard of it at all. There is a very short letter near the end of the New Testament called the Epistle of Jude. 25 verses, one of the briefest books in the Bible, written to warn a community against certain teachers who had come among them. And in the middle of it, the author writes this: Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these men, saying, "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his holy ones, to execute judgment on all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him." That is a quotation from the first chapter of the Book of Enoch. Not an allusion, not a paraphrase, a near direct quotation, introduced with the name of the supposed author and the formula prophesied. And a few verses earlier, the same letter refers to angels who did not keep their own position, but left their proper dwelling, and who are kept in eternal chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day, which is the Watcher's story in a sentence, and the second letter of Peter, which appears to draw on Jude, has a version of the same thing. God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of deepest darkness to be kept until the judgment. So a book that is not in most Bibles is quoted by name as prophecy, inside a book that is, which put later Christian scholars in an awkward position, and their responses to that awkwardness are worth going through, because they show you a canon being formed in real time. In the earliest period, the awkwardness barely registers, because Enoch was simply part of the furniture. The Epistle of Barnabas, an early Christian text from perhaps the late 1st or early 2nd century, quotes Enochic material with the formula, "The Scripture says." Athenagoras, writing a defense of Christianity to the Emperor Marcus Aurelius around 177, gives an account of angels who fell through desire for women, and whose offspring are the demons, and treats it as standard doctrine. Irenaeus, Clement of Alexandria, and others use it without apparent discomfort. The great champion is Tertullian, the North African writer, around the turn of the 3rd century, brilliant, combative, and quite unable to leave an argument alone. He wrote a treatise on women's dress, and in it he uses the Enochic story directly, that the angels taught women the working of gold and silver, and the use of pigments for the eyes, and the dyeing of wool, and that these arts of adornment are therefore of demonic origin. He is genuinely serious about this, and he knows perfectly well that some of his contemporaries are rejecting the book, and he takes them on directly. His arguments are wonderful. He says that some people don't accept it because it isn't in the Jewish canon, but, he says, they presumably think it couldn't have survived the flood. And he answers that Noah, being Enoch's great-grandson, would have heard the tradition from his own family and preserved it, or alternatively, that it could have been restored afterwards by the Spirit, as Ezra is said to have restored the Scriptures after the Babylonian destruction. And then he adds the argument that seals it for him. Since Enoch speaks about Christ, and since the letter of Jude quotes it, we ought not to reject anything that pertains to us. He is, in effect, saying, our own Scripture quotes it, so it stands. But the tide was already turning, and it turned for several reasons. First, and most importantly, the Jewish communities from which Christianity had emerged did not include Enoch in their scriptures. As Rabbinic Judaism consolidated after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE and the catastrophes that followed, the apocalyptic literature that had flourished in the Second Temple period was largely set aside. Almost none of it survives in Hebrew or Aramaic through Jewish channels. What survives because Christians kept copying it. And as Christian scholars became more attentive to what the Hebrew canon actually contained, books outside it became suspect. Second, and more theologically pointed, the Watcher's story became embarrassing because as Christian doctrine developed, particularly around the nature of angels, the idea that angels could have physical desire for women and could father children became increasingly problematic. If angels are incorporeal, they cannot do this. If they are pure spirit, the story is incoherent. And the story also has a specific consequence that made theologians nervous. It locates the origin of human sin outside humanity. That matters enormously, because the developing Christian doctrine of the fall places the origin of sin squarely in Adam's disobedience, transmitted through human nature. A story in which the corruption of the world is caused by an angelic invasion is a rival account. It's a competing explanation for the same thing, and you can't easily have both at full strength. And so the interpretation of Genesis 6 shifted. Instead of sons of God, meaning angels, an alternative reading was developed, that the sons of God were the descendants of Seth, Adam's righteous third son, and the daughters of men were the descendants of Cain, and that the sin in question was intermarriage between the pious line and the wicked line. No angels at all, just a bad marriage policy. This reading has a long history. It appears in Julius Africanus in the 3rd century, and it becomes dominant through the work of writers like Augustine, who discusses the question at some length in the City of God and comes down firmly on the Sethite side while acknowledging the older view existed. And once that reading is established, the Book of Enoch has nothing to explain, and every reason to be dropped. Jerome, translating the Bible into Latin at the end of the 4th century and shaping the Western canon in the process, classed Enoch as apocryphal. Augustine, in the City of God, deals with it politely and dismissively. He acknowledges that Enoch left some divine writings, since Jude says so, but argues that their very antiquity makes them suspect that we cannot verify what was truly his, and that they are not received into the canon by those who kept the scriptures with care. Their extreme age, he says, is precisely the reason for caution. And that's more or less that. In the Greek and Latin churches, the Book of Enoch drops out of use. There's a list of canonical and non-canonical books attributed to the patriarch Nicephorus in the 9th century, which includes Enoch among the rejected books and gives its length in lines. And after that, essentially nothing. The Greek text stops being copied. The last people to handle a complete manuscript in the Mediterranean world did so, as far as we can tell, sometime around the 8th or 9th century, and then it was gone. For the next 1,000 years, Western scholars knew the Book of Enoch existed the way you know a demolished building existed. Jude quotes it. The Church Fathers argue about it. Some quotations survive in later chronicles, most substantially in the Chronographia of the Byzantine monk George Syncellus, writing around the year 800, who preserved several long passages in Greek, apparently copying from earlier chroniclers. So a European scholar in 1500 could read a few pages of Enoch in Syncellus and know that a whole book had once existed. And every so often somebody claimed to have found it, and it was never real. There were rumors of copies in the East. In the 16th century, a French scholar and traveler named Guillaume Postel reported hearing that the Ethiopians possessed it, which was correct, but nothing came of it. In 1638, a Capuchin friar in Egypt sent home a manuscript he was told was the Book of Enoch. the great French scholar Nicolas Claude Fabry de Peresque bought it with enormous excitement, and it turned out to be an entirely different Ethiopic work, a treatise on cosmology and mysteries, with no connection to Enoch at all. Peresque died, still believing he had it. The manuscript ended up in the Vatican, where a young Orientalist named Ludolf examined it decades later and demonstrated the mistake. But Postel's rumor had been true, and this is the part of the story I find quietly wonderful. Because while Europe forgot the Book of Enoch entirely, it never stopped being read in Ethiopia. Not for 1 century. Christianity came to the kingdom of Aksum in what is now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea in the 4th century. The tradition holds that the king, Ezana, was converted through the influence of a shipwrecked Syrian Greek named Frumentius, who became the first bishop, and there is contemporary evidence for Ezana's conversion in his own inscriptions and on his coinage, where the pagan symbols are at some point replaced with a cross. And over the following centuries, the scriptures were translated from Greek into Ge'ez, the language of Aksum. The Book of Enoch was among them, translated, probably sometime between the 4th and 6th centuries, from a Greek version that was itself translated from the Ho Aramaic, and the Ethiopian Church, developing in relative isolation from both Rome and Constantinople, especially after the rise of Islam cut the land routes and the kingdom turned inward, arrived at a different canon. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has one of the broadest scriptural canons in Christianity, traditionally counted as 81 books, and it includes 1st Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, and other works that the rest of Christendom set aside. So, for something like 1,500 years, in the highlands of Ethiopia, in monasteries carved into cliffs and churches hewn out of solid rock, priests read from the Book of Enoch, copied it onto parchment made from goatskin, bound it between wooden boards, and passed it to the next generation, continuously. While in Europe it was a rumor and a footnote. There's a lesson in that about how transmission works, and about how much of what survives from the ancient world survives because of the patience of people at the edges of somebody else's map. Which brings us to James Bruce, and to one of the great, strange, and rather sad stories in the history of exploration. Bruce was born in 1730 in Stirlingshire, in Scotland, to a landed family. The estate was called Kinnaird. He was educated at Harrow and briefly studied law, which he disliked. He married the daughter of a wine merchant and went into the wine trade. His wife died of tuberculosis within a year in Paris, and he seems never fully to have recovered from it. He then spent years traveling in Spain and Portugal and North Africa, learning Arabic, studying antiquities, and generally becoming the sort of man for whom a settled life was never going to work. He was physically enormous, reportedly around 6 feet 4 inches at a time when that was extraordinary. Red-haired, imperious, courageous to the point of recklessness, and, by all accounts, not an easy man to spend an evening with. For a while, he served as British consul in Algiers, and then he formed an ambition that had defeated everyone who had attempted it, to find the source of the Nile. Now, we should be precise, because Bruce was not, and this is part of what got him into trouble later. The Nile has 2 main branches. The White Nile, the longer one, rises in the region of Lake Victoria in East Africa, and its source was not established by Europeans until the 1860s. The Blue Nile, which is shorter but carries the great majority of the water and almost all of the silt during the flood season, rises in the Ethiopian highlands at a spring feeding Lake Tana. Bruce set out to find the source of the Nile and found the source of the Blue Nile, which was a serious achievement and one that had also been reached by a Portuguese Jesuit named Pedro Paes in 1618, a fact Bruce disputed with some heat and rather less honesty than he might have. He traveled up the Nile, then across the desert to the Red Sea, and arrived in Ethiopia in 1769, and he walked into a civil war. The Ethiopia of that period was in what is remembered as the era of the princes, a long period in which the emperors were figureheads and so real power lay with regional warlords. The dominant figure at Gondar, the capital, was a formidable and ruthless nobleman named Ras Michael Sehul, who made and unmade emperors, and by most accounts had at least one of them strangled. Bruce spent roughly 2 years in that court, and he did well there, which tells you something about him. He had medical knowledge and used it, treating smallpox among other things, which made him valuable. He learned the language. He was given the governorship of a district and a court title. He hunted with the nobility. He appears to have been genuinely liked by some very dangerous people. He reached the springs at Gish Abai, the source of the Blue Nile, in November 1770, and, by his own vivid account, stood over them in a state of exaltation, followed almost immediately by a crushing melancholy. The sensation, familiar to anyone who has ever achieved something they spent years wanting, of standing at the goal and finding it is only a marshy spring in a field. And while he was in Gondar, he acquired manuscripts, Ethiopian manuscripts, in Ge'ez, and among them 3 copies of the Book of Enoch. He knew what they were. He had read his church fathers. He understood that he was carrying out of Africa a book that Europe had been trying to find for 1,000 years. He left Ethiopia in 1771, and the journey home nearly killed him. Across the Sudanese desert to Aswan, with his camels dying and his party close to death from thirst, and he was ill for a long time afterwards in Egypt. He got back to Europe in 1773, and what happened then is the part that makes me wince. He was initially celebrated. He presented a copy of Enoch to the King of France. Another went eventually to the Bodleian Library at Oxford. He kept one. He was received as a returning hero. And then he started telling people what he had seen. And London society decided he was a liar. The specific detail that undid him was a description of a practice he claimed to have witnessed in Ethiopia, in which a live cow was cut and steaks taken from it while it was still alive, and eaten raw, and the animal's wound then closed. This was regarded in the drawing rooms of London as self-evidently absurd, a traveler's tall tale, of the sort that everyone knew travelers told. Samuel Johnson, who had himself translated a Portuguese account of Ethiopia decades earlier and considered himself informed, was among the skeptics, and his opinion carried enormous weight. The satirists went to work. Bruce became, for a period, a figure of fun, the great, blustering Scot with his stories about eating live cows. He was, on the substance, largely telling the truth. Raw beef dishes are a real and prized part of Ethiopian cuisine. The precise practice he described has been much debated, and he may have misunderstood or embellished parts of what he saw, but the underlying observations were not fabrications. Later, travelers confirmed a great deal of what he had reported. but he had a personality that made it hard for people to give him the benefit of the doubt. He was proud and easily wounded, and could not let a slight go, and instead of laughing it off, he became furious and defensive, and withdrew to his estate in Scotland, and refused for years to publish his account. He finally published in 1790 5 enormous volumes, Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile, which were widely read and widely mocked, and which are now regarded as a genuinely valuable source for 18th century Ethiopia. And he died in 1794, at 64, in a manner that is almost too apt to bear. He had been hosting a dinner at Kinnaird. He was helping a lady down the front steps of his own house. He fell and struck his head, and never regained consciousness. A man who had crossed the Nubian desert on foot and survived 2 years in the court of Ras Michael Sehul died falling down his own staircase while being polite to a guest. And the manuscripts sat in the Bodleian and in Paris, largely unread, for another 30 years. Because there was, at that point, hardly anyone in Europe who could read Ge'ez. The man who finally did it was Richard Lawrence, an Oxford scholar who later became Archbishop of Cashel in Ireland. In 1821, he published the first English translation of the Book of Enoch, made from one of Bruce's manuscripts. And the reaction, again, was muted. It was a curiosity. Lawrence himself argued for an early date and thought the book significant, but the scholarly world of the 1820s had no framework for it. The study of what we now call Second Temple Judaism barely existed. It was treated as an eccentric, apocryphal oddity. That changed with the Germans. In 1851, August Dillman published a critical edition of the Ethiopic text based on 5 manuscripts, and then a German translation with commentary, and Dillman's work established the field. Over the following decades, as more Ethiopic manuscripts reached Europe, and there are now something over 100 known, the text became properly editable. And then the Greek came back. In the winter of 1886 to 1887, a French archaeological team excavating at Akhmim in Upper Egypt opened a grave in a Christian cemetery. It was the grave of a monk, and buried with him was a small parchment codex. Inside it were fragments of 2 lost works, part of a Gospel of Peter, and a substantial chunk of the Book of Enoch in Greek, roughly the first 32 chapters, the Book of the Watchers, in the language from which the Ethiopic had been translated. A monk in Egypt, sometime around the 8th or 9th century, was buried with a book he apparently valued, and it lay with him in the sand for 1,000 years, and it turned out to be the missing link in a textual chain. More Greek followed. In the 1930s, papyri acquired by the collector Alfred Chester Beatty and by the University of Michigan turned out to contain a large portion of the Epistle of Enoch in Greek from a codex probably of the 4th century. And then, in 1947 and after, the Aramaic came out of the caves. So consider the transmission chain now, laid out end to end, because it's one of the more remarkable survivals in literature. A text composed in Aramaic in Judea, probably in the 3rd century before the Common Era, copied on leather at Qumran in the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, and left in a cave when the community was destroyed during the Jewish revolt around 68 CE, translated into Greek, probably in Egypt in the 1st century BCE or the 1st century CE, copied in Greek by Christians for several centuries, quoted by Tertullian in Carthage and by Origen in Alexandria then gradually abandoned as the canon closed. Translated from Greek into Ge'ez in the Ethiopian highlands, sometime between the 4th and 6th centuries. Copied by hand in Ethiopian monasteries, continuously for over 1,000 years, on parchment made from goatskin, while every complete copy in Europe and the Near East was lost. Carried out of Gondar in 1771, in the luggage of a Scottish laird, who was subsequently laughed at in London for eating a steak. Translated into English in 1821. Confirmed in the original language in 1952, in fragments the size of a thumbnail, by scholars working with tweezers under glass in the Palestine Archaeological Museum in Jerusalem. Every one of those steps could have failed. Most texts from that period did fail. We have lists of ancient books that no longer exist, titles quoted by writers whose own works barely survived, whole libraries reduced to a name in someone else's footnote. What survives by accident and by stubbornness. Somebody kept copying. Somebody decided it mattered enough to spend a winter on a goatskin. Now let me tell you about the other 2 books that carry Enoch's name, because the tradition didn't stop when first Enoch was finished. It kept growing in different directions for another 1,000 years. 2nd Enoch, the Book of the Secrets of Enoch, survives in Old Church Slavonic, preserved in manuscripts from Russia and Serbia and Bulgaria, most of them quite late, from the 14th century onward. It exists in a longer and a shorter recension, and its original date and language are genuinely uncertain. Estimates range from the 1st century of the Common Era to the medieval period, with many scholars favoring an original Greek composition, possibly in Egypt, possibly in the 1st century. And its story is a different journey. 2 enormous men appear to Enoch, their faces shining like the sun, their eyes like burning lamps, fire coming out of their mouths, and tell him to prepare himself, because he is going up to heaven that day, and to tell his sons what to do in his absence. And they take him up through 10 heavens, one at a time. In the first, he sees the storehouses of the snow and ice and dew, and the angels who guard them. In the second, a darkness, and prisoners hanging, waiting for judgment, and they beg him to pray for them. And he says, "Who am I, a mortal man, that I should pray for angels?" In the third, he is shown paradise, a garden of indescribable beauty, with the tree of life at its center, and 4 streams flowing with honey and milk, and oil and wine. And then he is taken to the northern part of the same 3rd heaven, and shown a place of terrible darkness and cruel torment, with fire and frost and ice, and a river of fire, and cruel angels with instruments. And he says, "How terrible is this place!" Heaven and hell, side by side, in the same heaven. And upward through the 4th and the movements of the sun and moon, and the 5th with its watchers who are grieving, and the 6th with its administrative angels who regulate the seasons and the stars, and the 7th with the archangels and the ranks of powers, and eventually to the 10th, where he sees the face of the Lord, described as like iron made red hot in fire, emitting sparks. And the Lord tells Enoch things he has not told, the angels, the secrets of creation, how everything was made from the invisible and the visible, the whole account from the beginning. And the archangel Vretil is summoned to bring pen and ink, and Enoch writes for 30 days and 30 nights, and produces 366 books. And then he is sent back down to the earth for 30 days to instruct his sons, and told he must return afterwards. The instructions he gives are largely ethical and rather lovely in places, and quite unlike the apocalyptic thunder of First Enoch, he tells his children to help the poor, to clothe the naked, to give bread to the hungry, not to swear oaths, not to speak evil, to bear insult patiently, not to injure any living creature. There's a passage about how a person who wrongs a human being wrongs the image of God, and one about the souls of animals having a place at the judgment, where they will accuse the human beings who mistreated them. And there's a passage on human construction that I've always liked, that the human being was made of 7 components: flesh from earth, blood from dew, eyes from the sun, bones from stone, intelligence from the swiftness of angels, and from cloud, veins, and hair from the grass of the earth, soul from God's spirit and from wind. Which is not physiology, obviously. It's poetry about belonging to the world. The book ends with the extraordinary story of the birth of Melchizedek, in which a child is born from the body of a woman who has already died, fully formed, marked on his chest, speaking and blessing God, and who is then carried away by the archangel Michael into paradise to preserve him through the flood, so that he may be the priest of priests afterwards. And then there's Third Enoch, and this is the one I find most astonishing, and it's the one I'd like to end our tour of the texts with. Third Enoch, also called Sefer Hekalot, the Book of Palaces, is a Hebrew work, generally dated somewhere between the 5th and 9th centuries of the Common Era, from the world of Jewish mystical literature. And in it, a rabbi ascends to heaven. The text presents him as Rabbi Ishmael, a famous 2nd century figure, and is met by an angel who becomes his guide. And the angel's name is Metatron. And Metatron tells him who he used to be. He says, "I am Enoch, the son of Jared." And he describes what happened. That when the generation of the flood sinned, God took him from among them and brought him up in a chariot of fire with horses of fire, to be a witness in the height. And that when he was brought up, the angels objected. "What is this one born of woman doing among us? What business does a human being have here? One who comes from those who smell of decay." And God defended him. "My servant is greater and better than all of you." And then the transformation. Metatron says that his flesh was turned to flame, his sinews to fire, his bones to coals, his eyelashes to lightning, his eyeballs to fiery torches, and that God placed him on a throne like the throne of glory, and spread over him a canopy of splendor, and made him great in stature. The text says his height was extended to the extent of the length and breadth of the world. He is given 72 wings. He is given 365,000 eyes, each like the great light. He is given a robe of glory and a crown of kingship on which God writes the letters by which heaven and earth were created, and he is placed over all the treasuries of wisdom. And then he is given a name, and the name is the thing that caused the trouble. He is called the Lesser YHWH, the lesser bearer of the divine name. Now, that is a very dangerous title in a strictly monotheistic religion, and the tradition knew it. And there is a famous rabbinic story, preserved in the Talmud and elaborated in the mystical literature, about exactly this danger. 4 sages, the story goes, entered the orchard, Pardes, which is a euphemism for a mystical ascent. 1 looked and died. 1 looked and went mad. 1, Elisha ben Abuya, cut the shoots, became a heretic, and was afterwards called Aher, the other, his name too dangerous to speak. and only Rabbi Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. And the explanation given for Elisha's apostasy is that he ascended and saw Metatron sitting when everyone knows that no one sits in heaven except God, and seeing a second enthroned figure bearing the divine name, concluded that there were two powers in heaven. And the story continues with a detail that is somehow both terrible and comic, that Metatron was then brought out and given 60 lashes of fire, so that it might be established that he was a servant and not a second god, punished essentially for having been mistaken for God by somebody else. That story is the tradition arguing with itself in public about how far exaltation can go before it becomes something else. But here's what stays with me about 3rd Enoch. Take the long view of the character. He begins as 2 verses in a genealogy, a man in a list distinguished only by not dying. Then, in the 3rd century before the Common Era, he becomes a scribe who is shown the cosmos and writes it down. Then, in the Book of Parables, he is possibly identified with the Son of Man, who judges the kings of the earth. Then, in 2nd Enoch, he ascends 10 heavens and writes 366 books. And finally, in 3rd Enoch, he is transformed into the highest of the angels with a body the size of the world and 365,000 eyes, seated on a throne, bearing the name of God. That is what a religious imagination does with a gap in a text over the course of 1,000 years. Somebody noticed that a formula had been broken, that one man in a list of deaths didn't die, and asked what happened to him, and the answer kept growing. Now, before we begin to wind this down, let me say something about the modern life of the Book of Enoch, because if you've encountered it at all in the last few decades, it may well have been in some fairly strange company. Since the mid-20th century, the Watcher's story has been enthusiastically adopted by writers arguing that ancient texts record visits by extraterrestrials, the angels as astronauts, the giants as hybrids, the forbidden knowledge as technology transfer. And it turns up in a great deal of fiction and film and music, usually with the giants and the fallen angels detached from everything else in the book. I don't want to be sniffy about that, because it's a natural response to a genuinely strange text, and because the book has always attracted people looking for hidden things. That's what it's for. But I would gently say this: the ancient astronaut reading requires you to strip out almost everything that made the book matter to the people who wrote and preserved it. The calendar, the judgment, the compartments of the dead, the denunciations of the rich, the theology of history in 10 weeks, the argument about where evil comes from. The Book of Enoch is not a garbled memory of contact with something from elsewhere. It is a serious, sustained, sometimes furious attempt by people under enormous pressure to explain why a world made by a good God contains so much cruelty, and to insist that the record is being kept and the accounts will be settled. It remains scripture today for the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, and for the Eritrean Orthodox Church, and for Beta Israel, the Jewish community of Ethiopia. Which means that when someone tells you the Book of Enoch is not in the Bible, the accurate answer is, it depends whose Bible, and it has been in somebody's Bible continuously for around 1,500 years. And there's one more thing worth knowing, which is that Enoch was not alone. The Watcher's story was not some fringe idea held by one small group. It was, for a while, close to standard. You can see this in the Book of Jubilees, another Jewish work of the 2nd century before the Common Era, also preserved complete only in Ge'ez, also in the Ethiopian canon, also found in Aramaic and Hebrew fragments at Qumran, where there were more copies of it than of most books of the Hebrew Bible. Jubilees retells Genesis and Exodus with additions, and it takes the Watcher story as read. It says the angels were originally sent down to earth for a good purpose, to instruct human beings and to do justice on the earth, and that they then corrupted themselves. Which is a small but interesting variation. In Jubilees, the descent is at first authorized, and the fall is a betrayal of a legitimate mission rather than a straightforward desertion. Jubilees also uses the same 364-day calendar, with the same insistence that anyone using a different one has gone astray. And you can see it in a scroll from Qumran called the Genesis Apocryphon, which contains a scene that is one of the eeriest things in ancient literature. It's the birth of Noah, told from the point of view of his father, Lamech. The child is born, and he is strange. His body is white as snow and red as a rose, and his hair is white as wool, and his eyes, when he opens his eyes, the text says, the whole house shines like the sun. And the newborn stands up in the hands of the midwife and blesses God. And Lamech is terrified, because he does not believe the child is his. He believes his wife has conceived by one of the Watchers, and that this shining infant is one of the giants. And he confronts her, and she swears to him. The text preserves her speech, and she is furious and frightened, and she reminds him of their intimacy and swears by everything holy that the child is his and no stranger's. And he doesn't believe her, so he goes to his father, Methuselah. And Methuselah, who is an old man by now, cannot resolve it either. So he sets out on a journey to the ends of the earth, to Enoch, his own father, who is living among the angels, to ask him what has happened. Picture that. An elderly man walking to the edge of the world to ask his father, who has been taken up into heaven, whether his newborn grandson is a monster. And Enoch tells him, the child is Lamech's. The whiteness and the light are not corruption. They are a sign. This boy will survive the flood that is coming. Go and tell your son not to be afraid. That story exists in more than one version. A variant appears in the later chapters of 1st Enoch as well, and it does something the bare Genesis narrative never does, which is to make Noah's birth an event that frightened his own family. Even the historian Josephus, writing in Greek in the 1st century of the Common Era for a Roman audience, gives a brief version of the tradition that angels of God had intercourse with women and produced sons who were arrogant and violent, and whose deeds resembled those the Greeks told about the giants. So this was in the water. It was one of the ways people in that world explained the shape of things. And now, let me draw out the thread that I think runs through the entire Enochic literature, because once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. And it's the reason the tradition has the texture it does. It's obsessed with writing. Enoch's standing title is Scribe of Righteousness. His defining act over and over is not to fight or to rule or to prophesy in the street, but to write things down. He writes a petition on behalf of the fallen angels. He reads it aloud by the water until he falls asleep over it. He copies out what he is shown and instructs his son Methuselah to preserve the books and hand them to the generations of the world. In 2nd Enoch, he writes 366 books in 30 days, with a pen brought by an archangel. And the cosmos he is shown is itself a filing system. There are heavenly tablets on which everything is already inscribed. There is an angel who records the excesses of the 70 shepherds in a book, to be read out at the judgment. There are compartments in a mountain where the dead are held, sorted by category. In the epistle, the plea to the righteous is that their names are written, that their prayers are remembered, that nothing done to them has been lost. That is a theology built by people who worked with documents, for people who felt erased. And it's why the fate of the book is so fitting. Because everything I've told you tonight only reached us because that obsession was justified. Because generation after generation of anonymous people took the view that a text was worth the labor of copying it, even when nobody was asking, even when it had fallen out of favor, even in a language that only a few thousand people could read. Somewhere in Ethiopia, in the 1200s, or the 1500s, or the 1600s, a scribe sat down with a prepared goatskin and a reed pen and ink made from soot and gum, and ruled his lines, and began copying out a very long book about angels who came down a mountain. It took him months. He probably made mistakes and corrected them in the margin. He had no reason to think anyone outside his monastery would ever read his copy. Every complete Book of Enoch in the world today descends from someone like him. So let's slow right down now and let all of this settle. Think of the whole shape of it. A line in a genealogy. He walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And a 4-verse fragment about heavenly beings and human women that reads like the summary of a story someone forgot to include. And out of those gaps, over a few centuries, in a small province being pulled between empires, anonymous writers built an entire cosmos. Angels with names, standing on a snow-covered mountain and swearing an oath they already suspected they would regret. A ringleader afraid his friends would abandon him. Beings of immense power who could no longer raise their eyes to heaven, asking a man to write a letter for them. A room of crystal that was hot as fire and cold as ice, with nothing inside it. 4 hollow places in a mountain where the dead wait, sorted, until someone comes to read out the record. The winds in their storehouses, the stars in their prison. A tree whose fragrance would one day be in the bones of the righteous. And then, the long, improbable afterlife. Scrolls sealed in jars in a cave above the Dead Sea by people who expected to come back for them and never did. A Greek codex laid in the grave of an Egyptian monk. Ethiopian scribes ruling lines on goatskin, century after century, in a language Europe couldn't read, keeping a book that everyone else had let go. A furious Scotsman carrying 3 copies of it across a desert and being laughed at in London for the rest of his life. Fragments the size of a fingernail, laid out on glass in Jerusalem, being fitted back together by people with tweezers and patience. You don't need to hold on to any of it. Not the names of the watchers, not the gates of the sun, not the 10 weeks, or the 70 shepherds, or the number 364. It's all still there, in libraries in Oxford and Paris, and Addis Ababa, in caves that have already been emptied, in monasteries on cliffs, and it will still be there tomorrow and the day after, whether or not either of us is thinking about it. So let it drift. Let the mountain go and the oath on it. Let the crystal house go and the throne with wheels of fire. Let the shepherd on the cliff go and the sound of a stone breaking a jar that had been sealed for 2,000 years. And if there's one thing to keep as you settle, let it be this. Almost everything in that story was preserved by somebody doing something quiet and unglamorous and apparently pointless, copying a manuscript nobody had asked for in a cold room by lamplight, for a reader who would not be born for 1,000 years. They finished the page and put down the pen and went to sleep. And so can you. Sleep well.